Hey guys! Tonight we step into the sweltering heat of a Gambian afternoon, where the air shimmers above red dust roads and the smell of salt drifts in from the distant Atlantic. A small boy in Kanalai watches soldiers pass by, their uniforms crisp, their boots cutting sharp rhythms into the earth. In his eyes, they are larger than life, the kind of men who command silence just by standing still. He wants that. Not just the uniform, not just the salutes. He wants the power that comes with it. You probably won't survive this story if you're hoping for a fairy tale, because it's not one. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe. But only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Drop a comment with where you are and what time it is as you're listening. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. The Gambia in the late 1960s is a strip of land hugging the Gambia River. So narrow, you can almost see across to Senegal, wherever you stand. Yahya Jammeh grows up in Kanalai, a rural village tucked into the country's far west, where days are measured not by clocks, but by the shift in the wind and the calls of traders passing through. His father works the land, coaxing life from the soil, while his mother weaves her influence quietly into the community. She is respected, maybe even feared, in the way village matriarchs can be when they know everyone's business. Young Yahya walks barefoot between huts, carrying water in the mornings and gossip in the afternoons. He listens more than he speaks, storing away details about who owes who, which cousin fought with which elder, and who carries themselves as though they expect the future to bend around them. There's an early sense that people can be read like maps if you just know where to look for the landmarks. His schooling is modest. Chalkboard lessons, memorized facts about the British Empire that still lingers in Gambia's institutions. But his education outside the classroom is sharper. He watches how authority moves through the market, how policemen are treated differently, and how traders traveling from Bissau or Dakar slip small envelopes into palms before passing the customs hut. The boy doesn't yet know the word bribery, but he knows it works. In the evenings, he sits under the baobab tree, listening to the old men tell stories, not fairy tales, but accounts of politics, soldiers, and coups in neighboring countries. Senegal, Guinea-Bissau, Sierra Leone, places where power shifts overnight, where men in fatigues suddenly appear on the radio, promising a better tomorrow. Many people still think that growing up in such an environment is enough to plant the seed of ambition in anyone with an observant eye. So what do you think? Can a childhood framed by stories of power and betrayal really set a man's compass for life? By his teens, Yahya is tall, lean, and restless. He wears his school uniform like a costume he can't wait to shed. On weekends, he gravitates toward the military barracks in nearby towns, striking up conversations with soldiers who share tales of training in distant lands. They talk about Nigeria, about Ghana, about the strange cold of Europe during peacekeeping missions. He soaks it all in, convinced the military isn't just a career, it's a doorway. One day, an older cousin tells him about the National Gendarmerie, an elite branch of the armed forces. They're the ones who get the best postings, the ones who travel, the ones who, if rumors are true, earn more than their official salaries suggest. The idea lodges in his mind. From then on, every choice, every bit of charm, every quiet calculation moves him closer to the day he'll trade the dust of Kanilai for the sharp lines of a uniform. That day comes sooner than expected. At 19, he's accepted into the military academy. It's the first real step away from village life, the first chance to see how far he can stretch the ambitions that have been simmering under his quiet exterior. He leaves Canalai not as the farmer's son, but as a young man who intends to return with more than stories. He intends to return with power. The morning of July 22nd, 1994, begins like any other in Banjul. Humid air clinging to the skin, the slow churn of commerce at the port, and the chatter of street vendors mixing with the rumble of old Peugeot taxis. But inside the capital's small military garrison, the rhythm is different. Yahya Jammeh, now a lieutenant, moves with the steady certainty of someone who has rehearsed each step in his head. The plan is bold, almost absurdly so. Topple the government without firing a shot. The Gambia's president, Dada Jawara, has been in power for nearly 3 decades. His administration, while stable by regional standards, is fraying under the weight of corruption, economic stagnation, and public fatigue. In the barracks, whispers have been building for months. Some say the older generation of officers is too cozy with the politicians, too comfortable to shake the dust from the country's military. Others, like Jammeh, see an opening. He assembles a small cadre of junior officers, men he knows from training courses, men who have shared meals and complaints in the same cramped mess halls. The plan is simple. Move on State House, take control of Radio Gambia, and announce the change before anyone has time to mount a defense. Timing is everything. That morning, while much of the city focuses on preparations for Jawara's return from a trip abroad, Jammeh's convoy snakes through the streets. The soldiers are armed but calm, the tension hidden beneath casual banter. At the port, the government's police presence is light. No one expects trouble from a group of mid-ranking officers. By midday, the soldiers are in place. Radio Gambia's modest building becomes the first target. Inside, startled staff members are given a simple choice: step aside or be escorted out. Jammeh's men move with enough politeness to avoid panic, but with the unmistakable firmness of soldiers who know they have the upper hand. Within minutes, the transmitter is in their control. The broadcast that follows is calm, almost measured. A new Armed Forces Provisional Ruling Council has taken over, the voice says, in order to save the nation from incompetence and corruption. The old government is dissolved. Jawara, still out of the country, will not return to his office. The words are spoken without threats, without the rattle of gunfire in the background, but their weight is heavy enough to shift the course of the nation. Crowds gather outside State House, more curious than fearful. Some cheer, others stand in silence, reading the faces of the soldiers for clues about what kind of regime has just been born. Jammeh himself appears briefly, flanked by his allies, a faint smile playing on his lips. He promises discipline, development, and justice. It's a performance honed in the quiet confidence of his own mind, a young man stepping into a role he has long imagined. Behind the scenes, not everyone is convinced. Senior officers in the army, many of whom are away during the takeover, return to find themselves sidelined. A few grumble about the inexperience of the new leadership. Others calculate that their survival depends on swift pledges of loyalty. By the week's end, most have chosen the latter. Internationally, the reaction is cautious. Regional neighbors issue statements urging a quick return to democratic governance, though some leaders, perhaps seeing reflections of their own rise to power, refrain from outright condemnation. Aid agencies, unsure whether to pull funding or renegotiate terms, hold back for the moment. Jammeh moves quickly to consolidate control. Ministers from the old government are dismissed, some under the pretext of investigations into corruption. the civil service is shaken up, with loyalists placed in key positions. The new leader tours the country, presenting himself as a man of the people, shaking hands in marketplaces and holding meetings under the shade of village trees. In Kanalai, the reception is more than warm. It's euphoric. The village boy has come home not just in uniform, but as the head of state. Elders nod approvingly. Neighbors speak his name with a mix of pride and awe. Whatever the outside world thinks, here in his birthplace, the coup is a victory shared by all. Many people still think that the coup's bloodless nature was proof of broad support in the military and beyond. But others argue it was sheer luck. That one wrong move could have turned the streets of Banjul into a battlefield. So what do you think? Was it skill, or did history simply tilt in his favor that day? By the end of 1994, Yahya Jammeh is no longer just a soldier. He is the face of the Gambia's new era, a leader who has promised to clean house, restore dignity, and bring prosperity to a small nation with big ambitions. What no one outside his inner circle yet knows is that this era will not simply be about governance. It will be about control and the blurring of lines between state power and personal gain. The transformation from soldier to head of state is not a matter of changing uniforms. It's an evolution in how a man occupies space, and Yahya Jammeh understands that better than most. In the months following the coup, he begins crafting a version of himself designed not just to lead, but to be believed in. The first layer is visual. His public appearances become deliberate spectacles. Gone is the plain fatigues only look of the barracks. Now he favors flowing white robes, a prayer bead looped loosely in one hand, and a Quran in the other. The image is calculated, pious, untouchable, chosen. On state television, he is filmed stepping from long black Mercedes sedans, greeting schoolchildren, or standing at military parades with a slow, almost regal nod. The second layer is narrative. His speeches are woven with grand promises. Gambia will become a beacon of prosperity in West Africa. Corruption will vanish. The youth will have opportunities beyond the imagination. He speaks in the language of destiny, painting himself as a man placed in power by divine will. The tone is confident but soothing, like a neighbor you've known for years, telling you everything will be all right. Except this neighbor has the army behind him. Radio Gambia and the state-run press become his amplifiers. They replay his speeches daily, insert his quotes into news bulletins, and run endless footage of him shaking hands or touring fields. Villages are encouraged, sometimes pressured, to hang his portrait in meeting halls. In schools, children learn songs praising his leadership. It's not accidental. It's the deliberate construction of a cult of personality. Behind the curtain, a quieter effort is underway. Jammeh keeps his inner circle small, made up of those who either owe their positions to him or have been with him since his early military days. Each is rewarded with land, contracts, or control over key state institutions. Loyalty is not just expected, it's purchased. In the streets of Banjul, opinion is mixed. Some genuinely believe in the young leader's vision. They see the road repairs, the occasional shipment of new medical supplies, and the school renovations as signs of change. Others watch warily, noting that opposition politicians are finding themselves under sudden investigation, or that critical voices in the media are going quiet. A few journalists receive visits from security officers at odd hours. The message is unspoken but clear. Choose your words carefully. Foreign dignitaries arrive to meet the new president, smiling for cameras and shaking his hand. Many are simply curious. How did a 29-year-old lieutenant take over a nation in a single day. Jammeh plays the part of the young reformer, assuring them of democratic intentions. He speaks softly about elections in the future, never committing to dates. In Kanilai, the transformation is more personal. He invests in his home village, building roads, a mosque, and new facilities. To the locals, he's no longer just Yahya. He's the embodiment of what a Gambian can achieve. The benefits, however, are not spread evenly. Villages that criticize his rule find projects delayed or funding withheld. Those who praise him find new wells drilled and schools painted. The propaganda machine grows more inventive. National events are timed to coincide with his appearances. National holidays feature parades where school children march in formation spelling out his name. On television, slow-motion shots show him feeding cattle or walking through rice fields, the soundtrack swelling with patriotic music. But building an image comes with its own hazards. The more he is presented as flawless, the harder it becomes to acknowledge mistakes. Advisors who once offered honest counsel learn quickly that challenging him, even gently, can end careers. A few vanish from public life entirely, their names mentioned only in whispers. Many people still think that the cult of personality was simply a political necessity in Africa's volatile political climate, a shield against coups and foreign meddling. But others argue it was something deeper, an ego project, a personal need to be not just respected, but revered. So what do you think? Was it strategy or self-indulgence wrapped in strategy? By the end of his first full year in power, Yahya Jammeh is no longer merely a young officer who seized an opportunity. He is an institution unto himself, a leader whose face is as familiar as the Gambian flag, whose voice carries both promises and unspoken threats. And as the image grows larger, so too does the gap between the man and the nation he governs. Power once seized has to be secured. And Yahya Jammeh understands that control is not only about who salutes you, but about who dares to speak your name. In his second year as ruler, he turns his attention to the pillars that could still challenge him: political parties, the judiciary, and the military itself. The opposition is the first to feel the weight of this strategy. Leaders of rival parties find their rallies suddenly blocked by administrative delays or canceled outright for security reasons. A few are invited to private meetings at State House, where the conversation begins with polite tea service and ends with warnings. Some take the hint and temper their speeches. Others leave the country altogether, citing harassment. Jammeh also moves on the judiciary, replacing key judges with those he believes are sympathetic, or at least pliable. Court decisions start to reflect the priorities of the regime. Corruption cases against loyalists vanish quietly, while those against critics move with astonishing speed. In public, Jammeh frames these moves as efforts to restore integrity to the legal system. In private, it's about closing every door that an opponent could use against him. Within the army, loyalty is both rewarded and tested. Promotions are given generously to those who demonstrate public support, while officers who show even mild dissent are reassigned to distant posts or quietly retired. The intelligence service expands, creating a network of informants that stretches from the capital to remote villages. Soldiers know that their comrades might also be their watchers. On the streets, whispers of arrests begin to circulate. A journalist who questioned government spending disappears for several weeks, later emerging to announce, unconvincingly, that he had simply been on vacation. A former minister is seen boarding a plane to Europe under guard, his departure unexplained. The fear is subtle but effective. People don't need to know exactly what happens behind closed doors. They only need to know that it could happen to them. Still, Jammeh understands the importance of keeping the public facade intact. He continues touring the country, shaking hands, handing out scholarships, and attending football matches. Cameras catch him embracing elders and kissing babies. On television, he is the tireless servant of the people. In government offices, however, he is the man whose decisions are final, whose displeasure is best avoided. Kanilai, his hometown, is transformed into something resembling a presidential compound. Roads are paved, electricity lines extended, and a sprawling new residence rises from the earth. Local residents speak of the blessing of having the president among them, though some quietly admit that life here now revolves entirely around his movements and moods. The propaganda takes on a more personal tone. State radio runs segments highlighting his generosity, telling stories of school fees he has personally paid, of farmers whose harvests he has rescued by purchasing their crops at inflated prices. Whether these stories are true in every detail matters less than the fact that they are repeated often enough to feel like truth. Many people still think that this mix of charm and intimidation was a masterstroke, allowing Jammeh to appear beloved while keeping dissent contained. But others believe it was a dangerous tightrope. Too much fear risks rebellion. Too much charm risks exposure. So what do you think? Was he balancing with skill, or just daring gravity to catch up? By the late 1990s, the political opposition is a shadow of itself. The judiciary is firmly in line, and the army is filled with men whose promotions bear his signature. In public squares, his name is spoken with respect. In private rooms, with caution. What began as a sudden coup is settling into something more durable, a regime with deep roots and no intention of stepping aside. The next step is not merely to hold power, but to expand it into places where politics and profit become indistinguishable. And for that, he will need to reach far beyond the borders of the Gambia. In the capital's narrow streets, the air often carries the tang of the Atlantic, but in the back rooms of certain government buildings, the scent is more metallic. Ink drying on freshly signed decrees, paper stamped and sealed, authorizing moves few outside the inner circle will ever know. By the turn of the millennium, Yahya Jammeh has learned that real control lies not only in visible authority, but in the invisible network that sees and hears everything. He expands the National Intelligence Agency, turning it from a modest security service into a web of quiet watchers. Recruitment is discreet. Loyalists from the army, trusted civil servants, even young men and women from rural areas whose devotion can be shaped. They are trained to blend into the background at the market, in the mosque, at ferry crossings, reporting not just on political plots, but on personal habits, alliances, and even jokes told in the wrong company. The NIA's headquarters in Banjul becomes a building people pass without looking at too long. Those summoned there seldom talk about what happens inside. The stories that leak are inconsistent, but they share the same shadow. Once you're in their sights, your life changes. Some reappear with their public defiance replaced by polite silence. Others don't reappear at all. Jammeh himself takes a personal interest in certain cases. He is said to enjoy the briefings, the power of knowing who has said what and when. Ministers know that he often has more information than they imagine, and this knowledge keeps them pliant. A careless remark at a private dinner can resurface in a meeting with the president the next morning. The agency's reach extends beyond politics. Traders who refuse to cooperate with customs officers find themselves visited by men who know more about their family than they should. Religious leaders are courted or pressured into endorsing government policies, their sermons carefully monitored. Even within the armed forces, informants are placed to report on morale and loyalty. In public, Jammeh frames the NIA's work as essential for national security. He speaks of threats, foreign spies, saboteurs, drug traffickers, and assures citizens that only the guilty need to fear. But in practice, the line between national security and personal security is almost invisible. The agency is as much a shield for his rule as it is for the nation. Life in Banjul adjusts accordingly. Political conversations move to quieter, more private spaces. People learn to speak in riddles, or not at all when discussing the government. In tea shops, men lean in close before sharing an opinion. The atmosphere is not one of open terror, but of constant calculation, a weighing of every word. Kanalai, meanwhile, enjoys a peculiar immunity. Residents know the intelligence network is active here too, but its purpose feels different. The village is under a kind of protective bubble, benefiting from projects and investments, its loyalty to Jammeh reinforced by the knowledge that the president is watching over them. Both in pride and in scrutiny, many people still think that the NIA's omnipresence was exaggerated, a myth that worked in Jammeh's favor without needing to be entirely true. But others argue that its depth and precision were very real, that files existed on nearly everyone of political significance, updated regularly like the pulse of the nation. So, what do you think? Was it the legend of fear, or the reality of it, that kept the streets quiet? By the early 2000s, the intelligence apparatus is woven so tightly into Gambian life that the idea of removing it seems almost impossible. And within those same years, Jammeh begins turning that network towards something more lucrative than politics alone, laying the groundwork for a pipeline of profit that will make the Gambia's quiet coastline one of the most valuable smuggling corridors in West Africa. From the outside, the Gambia is a postcard. Palm-lined beaches, calm waters, and fishing boats painted in bright colors rocking in the surf. Tourists arrive with cameras, seeking sunsets and river cruises. But for Yahya Jammeh and a small circle around him, the coastline is more than scenery. It is an entry point, a discreet gateway for goods that never pass through customs records. By the early 2000s, West Africa has become an increasingly important link in the global drug trade. Cocaine from Colombia and other parts of South America is no longer moving only through the Caribbean into Europe. Cartels, facing tighter controls elsewhere, are probing the Gulf of Guinea, finding countries with weaker enforcement, long coastlines, and leaders willing to look the other way for a price. The Gambia, with its small size and strategically placed river, is perfect. Ships can approach from the Atlantic, anchor offshore, and offload cargo onto smaller boats that slip quietly upriver. Containers arrive at the port of Banjul, some marked with falsified manifests, others carrying goods that match the paperwork but hide sealed compartments. Jammeh doesn't just tolerate this activity, he organizes it. Through trusted military officers, he ensures certain shipments pass without inspection. The intelligence network, originally built to monitor political opponents, now serves a dual purpose: protecting the flow of narcotics and keeping anyone from speaking too freely about it. Foreign traffickers, mostly from South America, begin appearing quietly in Banjul. They don't linger in public places, preferring private villas or secure compounds on the outskirts. Meetings take place under the cover of night, often in the homes of intermediaries who straddle the worlds of business and politics. Briefcases change hands, and in return, the state's security apparatus offers safe passage. The arrangement is careful. Not every port officer is in on the scheme. Plausible deniability matters. Those not trusted are rotated out of sensitive positions. Those who prove loyal find themselves rewarded with promotions, new cars, or sudden property acquisitions that no one dares question too closely. For Jammeh, the advantage is twofold. The drug trade brings in cash far beyond what the state's official economy can generate, and it ties the loyalty of key figures directly to him, because in a business like this, exposure is ruin. A minister who owes his fortune to the president's smuggling routes is not likely to support a coup. Meanwhile, the public face of the government stays polished. Anti-drug speeches are delivered at regional conferences. Occasionally, small-time traffickers are arrested in highly publicized busts, convenient proof that the state is fighting the problem. The real shipments, of course, move unseen. In villages along the river, fishermen begin noticing strange activity at night. Boats without fishing gear, moving quickly and without lanterns. They talk about it quietly, but in a country where the intelligence service hears whispers in the market, they know better than to speak too loudly. Many people still think that Gambia's transformation into a smuggling hub was inevitable given its geography, that any leader in Jammeh's place might have been tempted. But others argue it required a deliberate choice, one that turned the machinery of the state into an escort service for traffickers. So what do you think? Was it just geography, or was it greed dressed up as opportunity? By mid-decade, the quiet drug routes through the Gambia are functioning smoothly, feeding into larger networks that snake through Europe. And in the president's office, the profits from this hidden economy are starting to bankroll not just personal luxury, but an entire style of governance where loyalty is measured in both political obedience and the size of one's cut. The visitors arrive in silence, their names absent from hotel registries, their arrivals timed to avoid attention. They come from far away, men with Spanish surnames, Colombian accents, and the easy confidence of people accustomed to moving across borders without leaving much of a trace. In the soft glow of Banjul's upscale villas, introductions are made over quiet dinners, the sound of the ocean muffled by thick walls and heavy curtains. For Yahya Jammeh, these guests represent more than just business. They are a gateway into a lucrative partnership that could turn the Gambia into a small but vital cog in the global narcotics machine. The Colombians, already familiar with West Africa's geography, are looking for leaders who can guarantee smooth transit of their product to Europe. In return, they offer what every entrenched ruler craves: steady streams of untraceable cash. The meetings are discreet but calculated. A trusted translator sits in on conversations, though Jammeh's preference is to keep the circle small. He listens intently, asking questions not about the quality of the product, that's taken for granted, but about logistics. Which ports will be used? How will shipments be disguised? What assurances can be given that European customs will see nothing unusual in containers originating from Banjul? The Colombians are equally pragmatic. They know the Gambia's port is small, which means fewer eyes and less bureaucracy. They've studied the chain of command and understand that with Jammeh's personal blessing, a container can move from ship to shore without so much as a glance inside. What they want is certainty. And Jammeh, with his grip on the army, the intelligence service, and the port authority, can provide it. The deal that takes shape is simple: protection in exchange for a cut. large enough to make it worthwhile, small enough to keep the operation invisible. Payment comes in the form of cash and, occasionally, in commodities that can be resold locally for profit. The money is moved discreetly, often through diplomatic channels, sometimes by hand in suitcases that cross the tarmac under military escort. Once the system is in motion, the results are swift. Shipments arrive off the coast under the cover of darkness, met by smaller craft crewed by men who know every twist of the river. Containers are loaded onto trucks with forged paperwork, waved through checkpoints by soldiers understanding orders. Within days, the cargo is on its way north, hidden in legitimate exports: timber, peanuts, processed fish, destined for European ports, where inspections are rare for Gambian goods. The Colombians, true to their word, keep the shipments flowing. They also begin investing in local businesses, restaurants, import companies, even real estate, both as a way to launder profits and to build a presence in the country that feels legitimate to outsiders. Some of these ventures become popular spots for the Gambian elite, unaware or unwilling to acknowledge who really owns them. Jammeh, meanwhile, uses his share to tighten his grip on the state. He bankrolls new security units, raises salaries for loyal officers, and funds lavish public works projects that showcase his generosity. To the public eye, these developments are proof of his commitment to national progress. In truth, they are financed by the same trade that moves unseen along the coastline each month. Many people still think that such an arrangement couldn't have lasted long without international attention, that sooner or later the sheer volume of cocaine moving through West Africa would force the world to look closer. But others argue it was precisely Gambia's small size and quiet profile that kept it off the radar for so long. So, what do you think? Was it inevitable that someone would notice? Or was this the perfect hiding place in plain sight? By the mid-2000s, Yahya Jammeh's connections to the Colombian cartels are no longer just business. They are an insurance policy. As long as the shipments keep moving and the money keeps flowing, he has both the means and the motivation to keep his hold on the Gambia unshaken. And with each successful delivery, the line between political leader and crime boss grows harder to see. On paper, the Gambia's state assets belong to the nation, its land, its infrastructure, its industries. But under Yahya Jammeh, state becomes a word with flexible meaning. By the mid-2000s, public property is no longer simply managed by the government. It is selectively redistributed into the hands of those closest to the president, often with no more than a signature and a quiet conversation. It begins subtly. A parcel of prime riverside land is leased to a development company run by one of his allies for a fraction of its market value. A government-owned warehouse near the port is repurposed for security operations, but ends up storing goods for a private business tied to the first family. These transfers are wrapped in layers of official paperwork, the language vague enough to pass casual inspection. For Jammeh, selling, or effectively giving away, state assets isn't just about personal enrichment. It is about building a network of dependency. The recipients of these assets know they have something to lose if they fall out of favor. Their fortunes are now tied directly to his goodwill, making loyalty not just political, but financial. Foreign investors, some legitimate and others less so, are drawn into this web. A businessman from the Gulf is offered exclusive fishing rights in Gambian waters. In exchange, he bankrolls a new fleet of patrol boats, on paper for the Navy, in practice for monitoring the smuggling routes that matter most to the regime. A Lebanese construction magnate wins the contract to refurbish Banjul's main market, but the profits circle back to accounts controlled by Jammeh's confidants. The line between private and public blurs further as charitable foundations are created. Officially, these organizations exist to fund scholarships, build clinics, or improve rural infrastructure. In reality, they become conduits for redirecting donor money into ventures owned by the president's allies. An international NGO might proudly announce a $2 million grant for a rural hospital, but on the ground, only a fraction of that budget reaches the project site. Within the civil service, a quiet culture shift takes hold. Mid-level bureaucrats begin to treat state property as currency in an unspoken marketplace of favors. Vehicles assigned to ministries are loaned to relatives. Government buildings are rented out for private functions. Land surveys mysteriously favor well-connected applicants over those who have been waiting for years. The public sees some of these moves, though often from the outside. They notice that new hotels on the beach are always linked to someone with government ties. They hear that certain businesses never seem to have trouble with permits or inspections. And they learn, through whispered conversations, which deals are untouchable and which offices it is best not to ask questions in. Many people still think that these transfers were just another form of corruption, common in many countries, an open secret that doesn't surprise anyone. But others argue it was something more deliberate, a restructuring of the nation's economy to serve a single man's power, ensuring that every profitable corner of the country passed through his network. So what do you think? Was it just routine graft, or a calculated rewriting of ownership itself? By the late 2000s, the Gambia's official economy is a narrow channel feeding into a much larger shadow system. And at the heart of it sits a president who can, with a nod, transform a public asset into a private empire without ever appearing to take it for himself. The courtroom in Banjul is not built for spectacle, but under Yahya Jammeh it becomes one. Here, justice is not just a process, it is a stage. In the early years after the coup, trials are rare and modest. By the late 2000s, they are calculated performances designed to send messages far beyond the defendants in the dock. The targets are chosen carefully. A former minister accused of economic crimes, a businessman charged with undermining the economy, a journalist accused of sedition. The language is always broad enough to cover any perceived offense, real or imagined. Charges appear overnight, arrests happen without warning, and the first time many hear of an accusation is when the accused is paraded into court under the watch of armed guards. Inside, the atmosphere is choreographed. Judges hand-picked for loyalty preside with a calm, almost bored demeanor, their rulings predictable before the first witness speaks. Witnesses, often coached or coerced, deliver testimony that lines up neatly with the prosecution's narrative. Defense lawyers, when they dare to take the case, work under the constant threat of professional ruin or worse. For the public, these trials are less about facts and more about theater. State television broadcasts the opening statements, close-ups of the accused looking weary, and carefully edited recaps that leave out anything resembling a challenge to the state's position. The verdict is inevitable. Guilty. Sentences are long, fines are steep, and the underlying message is unmistakable. Step out of line, and you too could be here. Jammeh understands the value of these performances. They project strength, reassure loyalists, and intimidate opponents. But they also give the illusion of legality. By framing repression as the outcome of a judicial process, he can claim, at least outwardly, that he is simply upholding the law. Occasionally, a trial is used for another purpose, to remove a rival from the political scene without the messiness of an assassination. A popular opposition leader is suddenly charged with treason. The trial drags on for weeks, dominating the news cycle, distracting the public from other issues. By the time the verdict arrives, the rival's reputation is battered, his movements scattered. There are, of course, quieter cases, hearings closed to the public, where the accused vanish into the prison system without the benefit of spectacle. These are for people whose disappearance is meant to be a warning only to a select few. Sometimes the warning is enough. Other times, the person simply never comes back. In Banjul's streets, people develop a quiet skill for reading the signs of an impending trial. A flurry of rumors, the sudden absence of a public figure, an uptick in state media's rhetoric about threats to national stability. When the pieces fall into place, most know better than to be seen expressing sympathy. Many people still think that these show trials were merely a reflection of Jammeh's paranoia, a man silencing his enemies one by one. But others believe they were part of a broader strategy, keeping the population in a state of low-level fear while maintaining the veneer of constitutional order. So what do you think? Was it raw fear driving the gavel, or was the gavel itself just another weapon in the arsenal? By the end of the decade, the Gambian court system has become a tool so finely tuned to the president's will that few bother to challenge it. And in that environment, Jammeh's other ventures, political, economic, and criminal, can continue without serious risk of legal interference. Beyond the Gambia's borders, Yahya Jammeh cultivates a second stage, one where the audience is not his citizens, but foreign leaders, diplomats, and donors. In this arena, the language shifts, the tone softens, and the performance changes from authoritarian certainty to polished statesmanship. His trips abroad are meticulously choreographed. In the Gulf, he dons the flowing white robes of a devout Muslim leader, quoting scripture and praising shared values. In Europe, he appears in tailored Western suits, speaking of investment opportunities and political stability. At African Union summits, he positions himself as a champion of sovereignty, warning against foreign interference, while quietly negotiating behind closed doors for aid packages and bilateral deals. These meetings serve multiple purposes. They bring in development funds that bolster his domestic image, roads, hospitals, and schools, with plaques bearing his name. They also give him a platform to push back against international criticism. When human rights groups raise concerns about political repression or disappearances, Jammeh frames them as misunderstandings, cultural differences, or even deliberate misinformation from his enemies. There's a certain charm in how he handles these conversations. He smiles easily, offers small jokes at the expense of bureaucracy, and thanks donors in public ceremonies broadcast back home. To a casual observer, he could almost pass for a reform-minded leader navigating the challenges of a small nation. But the real value of these trips lies in the relationships forged away from cameras. In side meetings, he secures promises of favorable trade agreements, discreet military training, or intelligence sharing arrangements. He learns which leaders can be persuaded to overlook certain internal matters in exchange for Gambian support at the United Nations or other multilateral bodies. This diplomatic maneuvering is not limited to formal allies. Jammeh also cultivates connections with leaders whose governance styles mirror his own, men who understand the value of solidarity when facing international pressure. They exchange visits, publicly praising each other's leadership, while privately discussing trade routes, security cooperation, and sometimes less official matters like the movement of illicit goods. Meanwhile, his government uses diplomatic channels to shield sensitive activities at home. Shipments pass under the cover of immunity. Embassy staff in certain foreign cities double as couriers, carrying documents, cash, or other discreet packages without the risk of customs inspections. At home, state media broadcasts his international appearances with pride. Footage of him shaking hands with presidents, kings, and prime ministers is played on loop, framed as evidence of the Gambia's growing importance on the world stage. The message is clear. Their leader is respected abroad, and therefore should be respected at home. Many people still think that Jammeh's diplomatic outreach was simply self-preservation, a way to fend off sanctions and keep foreign aid flowing. But others argue it was a calculated expansion of his power base, ensuring that even if pressure came from one quarter of the globe, there would be allies elsewhere to shield him. So what do you think? Was he just playing defense, or was this a global chess game with moves most never saw? By the late 2000s, Yahya Jammeh is not just a fixture in Gambian politics, but a recognized, if controversial, figure in international circles. And with each handshake and signed agreement, he weaves a safety net strong enough to protect both his rule and the shadow empire that sustains it. In early 2009, Gambians wake to a headline that feels like fiction. The president has ordered a nationwide campaign to root out witches. Officially, Yahya Jammeh claims this is a public health measure, an effort to cleanse the country of dark forces responsible for illness, misfortune, and even death. Unofficially, it's a bizarre flex of power that blurs the line between superstition and state policy. It begins in the countryside. Convoys of soldiers and paramilitary police roll into villages, accompanied by witch doctors brought in from Guinea. Loudspeakers announce the purpose of their visit. The community will be tested, and anyone found to be a witch will be treated. There is no debate, no chance to refuse. Elderly men and women are rounded up first, accused of harboring evil spirits. Those taken are herded into makeshift detention sites, school buildings, empty warehouses, where the so-called cleansing rituals begin. Witnesses later describe being forced to drink foul-smelling concoctions, some of which cause severe stomach pain, vomiting, and diarrhea. Others endure days of questioning, the line between interrogation and humiliation razor thin. The sick and the frail sometimes die before being released. For Jammeh, the witch hunts serve several purposes. They eliminate certain individuals he considers troublesome, village elders who challenge his authority, community leaders suspected of harboring opposition sympathies. They also spread a deeper message. No one is beyond the reach of the state, not even in the most remote settlements. And in a country where belief in witchcraft still runs deep, the campaign taps into old fears that blur resistance with superstition. The international reaction is swift. Human rights organizations condemn the witch hunts as a gross abuse of power. Foreign media report on the bizarre spectacle of a 21st century African leader using state resources to chase witches. Jammeh responds with defiance, accusing outsiders of disrespecting Gambian culture and misunderstanding the seriousness of spiritual threats. Inside the Gambia, the effect is chilling. Communities are fractured as neighbors turn on one another, some out of genuine fear, others to settle old grudges. The presence of soldiers in villages, ostensibly to conduct cleansings, becomes a reminder that the president's reach is not limited to the political sphere. It can touch the intimate fabric of daily life. State media portrays the campaign as a public service. They show footage of Jammeh speaking earnestly about protecting his people, intercut with scenes of ritual dances and herbal preparations. No mention is made of the sickness, the deaths, or the families left grieving. Many people still think the witch hunts were just a personal eccentricity, the product of a leader with too much power and a taste for the theatrical. But others argue they were a calculated tool, a way to reassert dominance in rural areas and distract from growing murmurs about the economy and corruption. So what do you think? Was it madness, or was it method, wrapped in madness? By the time the campaign winds down, hundreds, perhaps thousands, have been subjected to its humiliations. Some never recover their health. Others carry the stigma for the rest of their lives. And Yahya Jammeh, unshaken, has once again demonstrated that in his Gambia, reality can be whatever he says it is. The coastal highway shimmers in the midday heat as Yahya Jammeh's motorcade slices through. Black SUVs with tinted windows, sirens clearing traffic, uniformed officers riding alongside. The spectacle is a familiar one in Banjul and along the Atlantic coast. But what lies behind the tinted glass is more than just a president on the move. It is a ruler who has built a lifestyle far removed from the modest promises of his early days. By the early 2010s, Jammeh's personal wealth is on full display. His Kanalai estate has transformed into something closer to a royal compound. Sprawling gardens, imported marble floors, a private zoo stocked with exotic animals, and stables for his prized white stallions flown in from abroad. The contrast with the rest of the country, where many still live without reliable electricity or running water, is stark, but it is framed by state media as proof of Gambia's rising prosperity. The convoys often stop at newly built luxury resorts along the coast, some officially owned by private investors, but in reality controlled through a chain of shell companies tied to the presidency. Foreign dignitaries are received in opulent suites, treated to banquets where dishes arrive in silver domes and the wine flows freely. In these settings, Jammeh plays the role of gracious host, his charisma sharpened by the aura of absolute control. Luxury goods flow into the country with the same discretion as contraband. European cars arrive in shipping containers marked as agricultural equipment. Tailors from Morocco and Italy are flown in to design custom robes and suits. Even personal medical treatments are conducted abroad, with private jets on standby to whisk him to clinics in Dubai or Paris. His generosity to the loyal elite is equally extravagant. Ministers receive houses in prime neighborhoods, complete with imported furniture and landscaped gardens. High-ranking officers are rewarded with new SUVs, foreign travel allowances, and occasionally quiet stakes in businesses connected to smuggling or state contracts. The effect is to create a class of beneficiaries whose comfort depends directly on Jammeh's favor. For ordinary Gambians, the spectacle of such wealth is a mix of awe, resentment, and resignation. In villages, people still gather along the roadside to watch the motorcade pass, some waving, others simply observing the display. In Banjul's cafes, the talk is more guarded, acknowledging the excess, but always with a lowered voice. International visitors notice the divide too. Some Western diplomats quietly raise concerns about the optics of such opulence in a country that depends heavily on foreign aid. Jammeh counters with public gestures, donating bags of rice during religious holidays, funding scholarships for a handful of promising students. These acts are heavily publicized, reinforcing the narrative of a generous leader who shares his success with his people. Many people still think that Jammeh's lavish lifestyle was merely the spoils of power, an indulgence common among autocrats. But others argue it was also a form of political theater, each display of wealth reinforcing his dominance, each gift to a loyalist binding them tighter to him. So, What do you think? Was it just vanity, or was it a deliberate strategy to make loyalty a matter of survival? By the midpoint of his rule, Yahya Jammeh's life is a blend of ruler, showman, and businessman, each role feeding the others. And beneath the surface of the luxury lies a network of money and influence built on trade routes, political control, and fear, all ensuring that the man at the center remains untouchable. Within the barracks, loyalty is not just expected. It is cultivated, tested, and, when necessary, purchased. Yahya Jammeh knows that the military is both his greatest shield and his greatest potential threat. A single miscalculation in managing the armed forces could undo everything he has built. Promotions become a key instrument of control. Rising through the ranks is no longer simply a matter of merit or years of service. It depends on proximity to the president and demonstrations of personal allegiance. Officers who appear at public events, praise him in speeches, and deliver favorable reports from their units find themselves wearing new insignia sooner than expected. Others, whose loyalty is in question, are stalled in rank or quietly reassigned to distant posts where they wield little influence. Perks are generous for the favored. Choice assignments abroad, peacekeeping missions in Sudan, or training programs in the United States and Turkey are offered as rewards. These not only provide soldiers with extra income, but also give them the prestige of international experience. Upon their return, they are expected to repay that favor with unwavering loyalty. Jammeh also invests in specialized units that answer directly to him. These forces receive better equipment, higher pay, and privileges denied to regular troops. Their loyalty is reinforced not only through material benefits, but also by cultivating a sense of elite identity. They are not just soldiers, they are the president's soldiers. Yet, loyalty is never taken for granted. Periodic reshuffles keep ambitious officers from building their own power bases. Commanders are rotated between regions, preventing them from becoming too comfortable or forging independent networks. Training sessions double as subtle loyalty tests, with informants embedded among the ranks to report on conversations and attitudes. The military's involvement in illicit activities, particularly smuggling, adds another layer of dependency. Some officers are allowed to participate in moving contraband, whether drugs, luxury goods, or other profitable cargo, under the condition that a cut flows upward. This arrangement not only enriches them, but also implicates them in the president's shadow economy, ensuring they have as much to lose as he does if the system collapses. Among ordinary soldiers, the benefits of serving under Jammeh are more modest, but still tangible. Salaries arrive on time, new barracks are built, and food rations improve. For many, these small gains are enough to keep them from questioning the larger picture. In the capital, the sight of uniformed men patrolling the streets remains a constant reminder of the regime's reach. Checkpoints pop up unpredictably, manned by soldiers who operate with broad authority. While these are presented as measures for public safety, they also serve as a subtle show of force, proof that the military is ever present, watching and ready. Many people still think that Jammeh's control over the army was a straightforward exchange of loyalty for rewards, but others believe it was more intricate, a carefully woven system of mutual dependence in which corruption, privilege, and fear bound the institution to him in ways that pure patriotism never could. So what do you think? Was it just bribery with medals, or a deeper strategy that made betrayal almost impossible? By the early 2010s, the Gambian military is less a neutral institution and more an extension of the president's will. And with their loyalty secured, Jammeh turns them toward a new role, not just defending his rule, but actively participating in the very trade that fuels it. The barracks are no longer just a place for drills, weapons cleaning, and early morning parades. Under Yahya Jammeh, they become a hub for something far more lucrative, an unofficial extension of the smuggling networks that feed his wealth. Drugs, cash, and high-value goods move not just through the Gambia's ports and rivers, but also through the guarded compounds of the armed forces themselves. It starts quietly. A few trusted officers are given special assignments that involve escorting unmarked trucks from the port to undisclosed locations. Officially, these are sensitive security transfers, materials that require protection. In reality, they are shipments the president wants moved without interference from customs or civilian police. The soldiers involved receive generous allowances for their work, paid in envelopes of cash or foreign currency. Over time, the arrangement grows bolder. Warehouses on military property, off limits to ordinary law enforcement, become storage points for contraband. These facilities are ideal, heavily guarded, beyond the jurisdiction of civilian authorities, and accessible only to those with the right clearance. Cocaine from South America, heroin from Asia, even counterfeit goods destined for regional markets pass through these gates under the watchful eyes of soldiers whose loyalty has already been bought. Participation in these operations is a privilege, not a right. Jammeh controls access carefully, using it as both reward and leverage. An officer who has proven loyalty may be invited into the inner circle of the trade. One who steps out of line can find himself abruptly reassigned, losing not only status but the steady stream of extra income. For the soldiers involved, the side business transforms their lives. New houses appear in their home villages. Children are sent to private schools abroad. Cars far beyond a military salary's reach suddenly fill their driveways. But with the rewards come risks, and those risks are part of the design. By implicating them in criminal activity, Jammeh ensures that they are bound to him. Any move against him would be a move against their own survival. The drug routes themselves are handled with military precision. Shipments arrive at night, sometimes under the guise of joint exercises or logistics drills. Vehicles move in convoy, their passage through checkpoints smoothed by soldiers stationed there for that exact purpose. If a curious officer asks too many questions, he is quickly rotated out or given orders to focus elsewhere. For the general public, this underworld remains mostly invisible. What they see is an increasingly well-funded military with new vehicles, upgraded weapons, and crisp uniforms. On state television, Jammeh praises the armed forces for their service to the nation, their loyalty rewarded with televised parades and public ceremonies. Few know, or dare to say, that some of that funding doesn't come from the national budget at all. Many people still think the Army's involvement in smuggling was simply a perk for loyalists, a way to keep them invested in the regime. But others argue it was the central pillar of Jammeh's control, turning the military into both a beneficiary and an accomplice, making any coup attempt not just treason, but self-destruction. So what do you think? Was it a side hustle, or the real backbone of the state? By the time these networks are fully established, the line between the Gambia's armed forces and its criminal underworld is almost impossible to draw. And with soldiers now guarding both his political power and his hidden fortunes, Yahya Jammeh's grip on the country feels unshakable, at least from the inside. The call comes before dawn. In the quiet hours when Banjul's streets are still empty, a handful of senior officers are summoned to State House. The air inside is tense, the kind of stillness that precedes a storm. News has reached Yahya Jammeh of something unthinkable, a coup plot, one that involves men he once trusted. It is March 2006, and the plan, according to intelligence briefings, is already in motion. A group of mid to high-ranking officers has been meeting in secret, their grievances ranging from personal slights to the growing corruption at the heart of the regime. They believe the army's loyalty is not as solid as it appears. They believe that with the right timing, they can remove the president before he even realizes he's in danger. But they underestimate both his reach and his paranoia. For weeks, Jammeh's intelligence network has been feeding him fragments of the conspiracy. A whispered conversation in a mess hall, a meeting in a private home, coded messages passed between soldiers. When enough of the puzzle falls into place, he moves. Before sunrise, loyal troops fan out across the city. Roadblocks go up at key junctions. Communications are quietly cut in certain districts. At the main barracks, suspected conspirators are woken by the sound of boots pounding on concrete and the metallic snap of handcuffs. Some are arrested in their uniforms. Others are taken from their homes, still in civilian clothes. Their families left staring in shock as they are driven away. The official announcement comes later that morning. State television interrupts programming to report that a dangerous coup attempt has been foiled. Yahya Jammeh appears calm but stern, flanked by his top security chiefs. He vows to protect the stability of the nation and warns that traitors will face the full weight of the law. The message is clear. The state is watching, and it will act before threats can fully form. The trials are swift and highly publicized. Courtrooms fill with uniformed guards, and the accused are paraded before cameras. Testimony is rehearsed, evidence selectively presented. Some of the defendants confess, whether out of guilt or under pressure is never clear. Sentences are harsh, long prison terms for some, death sentences for others. The purge goes beyond those directly involved. Officers whose loyalty is even slightly in doubt are reassigned, demoted, or dismissed. New promotions go to men whose devotion is unquestioned, binding them even tighter to the president. The message ripples through the ranks. Dissent will be discovered, punished, and erased from the record. For Jammeh, the failed coup becomes a tool. It justifies further tightening of security, the expansion of intelligence surveillance, and an even heavier reliance on the elite units most loyal to him. Publicly, he frames it as proof that enemies still lurk in the shadows, both at home and abroad. Privately, it reinforces his belief that trust is a luxury he cannot afford. Many people still think the 2006 coup attempt was smaller than the government claimed, exaggerated to justify a purge. But others believe it was a genuine threat, one that nearly succeeded before being stopped at the last moment. So what do you think? Was it a close call or a calculated play to remove inconvenient officers? When the dust settles, the army is leaner, more loyal, and more deeply entangled in the shadow economy that sustains the regime. The failed coup, whether real or inflated, becomes a turning point. After it, Jammeh rules not just with authority, but with a sharpened sense of survival. In the world of diplomacy, immunity is a shield, meant to protect the work of envoys and embassies from interference. In Yahya Jammeh's Gambia, it becomes something else entirely, a cloak under which some of the regime's most sensitive operations move unseen. The idea is elegant in its simplicity. Diplomatic shipments and vehicles are exempt from routine inspection. Couriers traveling under diplomatic cover can carry sealed pouches and cargo without fear of customs agents breaking them open. For a leader who has turned his state into a hub for illicit trade, such privileges are a gold mine. Embassies in strategic locations, Europe, the Middle East, and parts of West Africa become nodes in a quiet network. Containers labeled as official documents or embassy supplies move across borders with the confidence that no one will dare question them. Some carry cash, the profits from drug routes and other shadow dealings. Others contain goods, luxury items bound for private markets, or smaller quantities of narcotics meant for trusted distribution partners. The staff involved are hand-picked, a mix of loyal civil servants and operatives tied to the intelligence service. Many are rewarded with generous stipends and postings in cities far more comfortable than Banjul. They understand the unspoken rule: the embassy is both a diplomatic mission and a safe house for sensitive cargo. Occasionally, a shipment raises suspicion abroad. A customs officer in a European port might note irregularities in paperwork. A journalist in a Middle Eastern city might hear whispers about strange packages arriving from the Gambia. But diplomatic immunity does its job. Questions are asked politely, then dropped. The cargo moves on. Jammeh's use of diplomatic channels is not limited to physical goods. Certain embassy accounts serve as way stations for funds moving between offshore banks. Transfers pass through under the guise of operating budgets or cultural exchange programs. By the time the money reaches its final destination, in a Caribbean shell company or a discrete Dubai account, it is scrubbed of any obvious link to the original trade. At home, this system is invisible to the public. State media covers embassy events in glowing terms. Gambian officials meeting foreign ministers, attending trade fairs, hosting National Day receptions. These images reinforce the idea of a small country punching above its weight in global diplomacy. No one watching sees the hidden cargo or the coded cables that run parallel to the official business. Many people still think that Jammeh's use of diplomatic immunity for smuggling was an occasional abuse, a few isolated incidents rather than a standing practice. But others argue it was institutionalized, woven into the very way his foreign service operated. So what do you think? Was it opportunism on the margins, or a full-fledged pillar of the regime's shadow economy? By the early 2010s, the diplomatic network is humming as smoothly as the port operations and military convoys. And with safe passage guaranteed for his most sensitive cargo, Jammeh can expand his ventures abroad with a confidence that borders, at least for him, are little more than lines on a map. From the outside, the Yahya Jammeh Foundation for Peace appears to be a symbol of generosity. Its brochures are filled with images of smiling children receiving school supplies, farmers standing beside new wells, and rural clinics freshly painted in the national colors. Donors, both local and international, are told that their contributions will go directly toward improving the lives of Gambians. The reality, as with so much under Jammeh's rule, is far murkier. The foundation is officially chaired by the First Lady, lending it an air of prestige and warmth. It hosts galas attended by diplomats, businessmen, and visiting dignitaries, where pledges are made over lavish dinners. In these settings, Jammeh plays the role of benevolent leader, speaking of his deep commitment to development and the future of the nation. Cameras capture every handshake, every smiling child handed a school uniform. But behind the charity's public face, the flow of money is carefully managed to serve other ends. Large donations from foreign partners often pass through accounts controlled by individuals close to the president. Portions are spent on the advertised projects, enough to maintain credibility, while substantial sums are quietly redirected to ventures that have nothing to do with social welfare. Some of this money fuels private businesses owned by the president's allies. A shipment of construction materials purchased for a rural hospital might end up building a hotel on the coast. Equipment meant for schools is diverted to private institutions charging high tuition fees. Agricultural grants are awarded to farms that double as fronts for other, more profitable activities. The foundation also functions as a soft power tool. Villages that publicly pledge loyalty to the president are more likely to see its projects, new wells, electrification, health centers. Those that criticize him or fail to turn out for rallies often find their applications lost in the system. Aid becomes another lever of control, cloaked in the language of charity. Internationally, the foundation is useful for image management. It provides talking points during meetings with donors and a shield against criticism. When accused of corruption or repression, Jammeh can point to its projects as proof of his dedication to the people. For some foreign partners, this veneer is enough to justify continued cooperation, even when the truth is an open secret. Many people still think that the Yahya Jammeh Foundation for Peace was a genuine, if imperfect, charitable effort, undermined by a few bad actors. But others argue it was a front from the start, a financial sieve designed to funnel goodwill and donor money into private coffers. So what do you think? Was it charity gone wrong, or a cynical masquerade wearing the mask of compassion? By the mid-2010s, the foundation's logo is as recognizable in the Gambia as the national flag. And yet, for all the wells dug and books handed out, it leaves behind a question that lingers long after the ribbon cuttings. How much of this was truly for the people? And how much was for the man who made sure the cameras were always there? In a country as small as the Gambia, the press is not just a mirror of public life. It is one of the few institutions that can hold the powerful to account. Yahya Jammeh knows this from the moment he seizes power, and by the mid-2010s, he has transformed the media landscape into one where dissent is not simply discouraged. It is dangerous. The process is gradual at first. Independent newspapers face sudden tax audits, their printing equipment seized over minor regulatory infractions. Radio stations are told their licenses need review and are temporarily shut down, often reopening only after agreeing to tone down their coverage. Journalists critical of the regime are summoned for questioning, sometimes held for days without charge. Most return to their newsrooms quieter, their pens and microphones dulled by the experience. Some cases are more brutal. A prominent editor disappears after publishing a series of articles on government corruption. Weeks later, his charred remains are found in a remote area. Another journalist flees the country after receiving repeated threats, leaving behind a family too frightened to speak publicly. Each incident sends a clear message to the profession. There are lines you do not cross. State media, by contrast, thrives under Jammeh's watch. Its anchors speak with reverence, referring to him with grand titles. News bulletins begin and end with footage of his speeches, public appearances, and ceremonial acts of generosity. Every development, from a new road to a minor school renovation, is framed as a direct result of his leadership. The line between news and propaganda dissolves. Foreign media outlets attempting to report from the Gambia face similar barriers. Visiting journalists are shadowed by security agents, their local contacts questioned after interviews. Those who push too far are denied visas or expelled outright. The few who manage to publish critical stories from within the country often rely on clandestine meetings and encrypted communications, methods more fitting for war zones than a peaceful coastal state. The result is an atmosphere where self-censorship becomes the norm. Editors weigh every headline against the risk of attracting unwanted attention. Reporters choose safe topics over investigative work. Talk shows avoid political guests unless they are firmly pro-government. Even gossip in the marketplace grows cautious when it brushes too close to politics. For Jammeh, this control over the narrative is as valuable as any economic or military asset. Without competing versions of events, the official story becomes the truth by default. His speeches are replayed as fact, his explanations for crises accepted without challenge, and his claims of progress untested by scrutiny. Many people still think that the suppression of the press under Jammeh was just an unfortunate byproduct of maintaining stability in a volatile region. But others argue it was a deliberate strategy, as calculated as any coup or smuggling operation, a way to ensure that the only voice loud enough to be heard was his own. So what do you think? Was it a reluctant compromise for order, or the silencing of a nation to keep the shadows intact? By the time the press is fully subdued, Gambians learn to read between the lines, not in print, but in what is missing from the page and the broadcast. And in that silence, Yahya Jammeh's control feels almost absolute. The night knocks are the ones people remember. They come without warning, no loud shouting, no dramatic entry, just the quiet, deliberate rapping on a door in the small hours. By the time the household stirs, the figures are already there. Men in plain clothes, sometimes with a uniformed soldier lingering just far enough back to avoid the conversation, but close enough to remind you who sent them. In Yahya Jammeh's Gambia, disappearances are not announced. There is no official process, no paperwork that relatives can follow. A husband leaves for work one morning and never comes home. A student who has been speaking too loudly about politics fails to return from class. A shopkeeper seen talking to a known opposition figure closes up at dusk and is never seen again. The targets vary. Politicians, journalists, business people, sometimes even low-level civil servants. What connects them is the perception, accurate or not, that they are a threat to the regime. Threat can mean plotting an actual challenge to power, but it can also mean asking questions in the wrong setting, refusing a deal, or simply knowing something you were not meant to know. Families learn quickly how to navigate the aftermath. They visit police stations first, where officers either shrug or quietly advise them to stop asking. They go to the prisons, where guards shake their heads. Some try the intelligence agency's headquarters, a building whose walls seem to absorb hope. There are no official records, no admission that the person was ever taken. On rare occasions, the missing reappear, changed, thinner, eyes darting as if expecting another knock. They seldom speak about where they were or what happened to them. Others are rumored to be held in remote detention sites, guarded by soldiers who will never confirm their presence. And then there are those who never come back at all, their names fading into whispered cautionary tales. The disappearances serve multiple purposes. They remove potential threats without the messiness of a public trial. They create uncertainty. Anyone could be next, for reasons that are never fully explained. And they spread fear horizontally, from one household to the next, until even friends hesitate to speak freely to one another. International organizations try to raise the alarm, compiling lists of the missing, issuing statements, calling for investigations. Jammeh responds with flat denials, sometimes mocking the reports as fabrications. State media dismisses the claims as the work of enemies of the nation. In villages and city neighborhoods alike, the effect is the same. People learn to live under an invisible clock. You never know when it will be your turn, so you speak carefully, move quietly, and avoid being noticed in the wrong context. Many people still think the disappearances were rare exceptions, harsh but isolated incidents aimed at serious threats. But others argue they were a core tactic of governance, designed to maintain control not through constant violence, but through the constant possibility of it. So what do you think? Was it targeted security, or was it fear as an institution? By the time the pattern is firmly set, the fear of the midnight knock is as potent as any law on the books. And in that fear, Jammeh finds one of the most effective tools of his long rule, one that requires no court, no trial, and no explanation at all. The announcement is made with fanfare, as if history itself is about to be rewritten. Standing before cameras, Yahya Jammeh declares that he has discovered a cure for AIDS, one that works in just a matter of days. The setting is theatrical, a table lined with herbal mixtures, Quranic verses recited for spiritual gravitas, and carefully selected patients seated nearby, nodding in agreement. He explains the treatment with complete confidence. It is a blend of natural herbs, prayers, and his personal healing touch, administered over a set number of days. The claim is sweeping. The virus will be eliminated entirely, leaving the patient free of disease. State television airs the announcement repeatedly, each broadcast portraying Jammeh as both a political leader and a divinely guided healer. Internationally, the reaction is disbelief. Medical experts condemn the claim, warning that it is not only scientifically impossible, but also dangerous. Foreign governments and health organizations issue statements urging caution. But in the Gambia, the weight of the president's word is enormous, and those who publicly doubt him do so at their own peril. Patients are brought to his compound in Kanalai, where the treatments are carried out under the watch of both medical personnel loyal to him and state security. Some arrive willingly, desperate for hope. Others are pressured, even removed from conventional medical programs, to undergo the president's regimen. Foreign journalists who attempt to cover the program critically are denied access, their questions brushed aside. For the duration of the treatment, patients are housed in controlled environments. They are fed specific diets, their movements monitored, and their progress reported as miraculous. State media runs glowing coverage, smiling cured patients giving thanks, Jammeh walking among them with an air of humble triumph. No mention is made of those who worsen, relapse, or die. Behind the scenes, medical professionals who oppose the program face intimidation. A few flee the country, fearing for their safety. International NGOs working in the field of HIV/AIDS treatment find their operations hampered or outright shut down. The result is a chilling reduction in access to scientifically proven therapies. Many people still think the AIDS cure episode was a product of genuine belief, that Jammeh truly thought he had been gifted with healing powers, but others see it as pure performance, a calculated move to bolster his image as a leader blessed with divine authority, immune to the limits of ordinary politics. So what do you think? Was it misguided faith, or a dangerous blend of propaganda and personal ego? By the time the program fades from headlines, the damage is done. Lives have been lost, the public health system further weakened, and the president's image reshaped. not as a mere ruler, but as a man who claims to hold life and death in his hands. And for those who lived through it, the memory lingers as one of the strangest and most chilling chapters of his reign. If drugs were the veins of Yahya Jammeh's shadow economy, money laundering was its heartbeat, keeping the system alive, moving, and protected from scrutiny. By the mid-2010s, the network was polished enough to function across continents, with funds flowing through a maze so complex that even those involved sometimes lost sight of the original source. The methods were varied. Some began with the sale of legitimate goods, fish, peanuts, timber, shipped abroad with inflated invoices. The extra value, hidden on paper, was the dirty money folded into clean transactions. Other times, large sums were routed through businesses that existed only on paper. Import-export companies with no staff, real estate developments that never broke ground, consulting firms with no actual clients. Dubai emerged as a favored hub. Its banks offered a blend of financial sophistication and discretion, and its booming property market provided endless opportunities to park wealth. Apartments and office spaces were purchased under the names of relatives, trusted aides, or shell corporations. Rent from these properties, when collected, served as perfectly legal income, at least on the surface. The Caribbean played its part too. In certain islands, offshore companies could be registered with minimal disclosure. These entities became holding vessels for everything from bank accounts to luxury yachts. Funds could bounce from the Gambia to a Caribbean shell, then to a European investment account, and finally to a Gulf-based real estate venture, emerging on the other side, scrubbed of any obvious connection to Banjul's political underworld. Cash couriers remained essential for certain transactions. Loyalists with diplomatic cover would travel with suitcases of currency, moving money directly between trusted hands, bypassing the banking system entirely. It was slower and riskier, but in some situations it was the only way to ensure discretion. International partners, knowingly or not, became part of the laundering process. Foreign businessmen who invested in Gambian resorts or infrastructure often found themselves in joint ventures with entities tied to the president's network. Development loans could be siphoned into these projects, blended with illicit funds until the origins were indistinguishable. Inside the Gambia, this hidden wealth showed itself in quiet ways. A sudden boom of luxury construction along the coast, private schools with tuition fees rivaling those in Europe, high-end boutiques catering to a clientele far richer than the average citizen. The money was there. It just wasn't coming from the visible economy. Many people still think Jammeh's money laundering operations were small-scale, more about personal spending than systemic control. But others argue they were the skeleton of the entire regime, giving structure to the corruption, allowing illicit gains to flow seamlessly into both personal fortunes and political machinery. So what do you think? Was it just about getting rich, or was it about building a financial fortress no court could touch? By the time this system is fully in place, Jammeh's wealth exists everywhere and nowhere. Pieces of it are scattered across continents, disguised in enough layers of ownership to make even determined investigators chase shadows. And as long as the money keeps moving, the regime it supports keeps breathing. By the mid-2010s, the cracks in Yahya Jammeh's carefully constructed facade begin to show, not as a sudden collapse, but as small fractures spreading under the weight of years. The signs are subtle at first. Murmurs in the markets, sharper jokes told in private, a shift in the way soldiers look at their boots instead of saluting too quickly. The economy, though still benefiting from the president's offshore wealth, is straining. Tourism, the country's most visible industry, feels the pinch from bad press abroad, as stories of human rights abuses filter into travel advisories. The dalasi weakens. Imported goods cost more, hitting ordinary Gambians hardest. In the villages, promises of development begin to sound like recycled slogans rather than real plans. Among the youth, a restless energy grows. Many have known no other leader but Jammeh, yet their patience is wearing thin. Social media, once negligible in Gambian politics, begins to change the conversation. Videos and articles critical of the regime circulate from the diaspora, bypassing state media's control. Young Gambians abroad, free from the reach of the NIA, speak openly and organize campaigns urging resistance. Within the military, loyalty remains, but it is no longer absolute. The memory of the 2006 coup purge has kept many cautious, but younger officers who rose after that period see less personal benefit in the arrangement. Some resent the older guard's monopoly on lucrative assignments and smuggling privileges. A few quietly imagine themselves as future leaders, their ambitions carefully hidden for now. Internationally, Jammeh's image is less stable. Some of his old allies have left power, replaced by leaders less inclined to shield him. Aid donors demand more transparency. Regional organizations take a harder line on political repression. The diplomatic immunity that once felt like an impenetrable shield begins to look thinner in certain quarters. The president responds the way he always has, with displays of strength. More military parades, more grand promises, more televised acts of charity. But the undercurrent is different now. Where once crowds pressed forward to cheer, there are gaps along the roadside. Where once ministers fought for a place in the motorcade, a few now find excuses to travel abroad during key events. Many people still think these cracks were inevitable. No regime can hold absolute control forever. But others believe they were accelerated by complacency, that Jammeh's long years in power dulled his instinct for reading the mood. So what do you think? Was it time itself that eroded his grip? Or did he simply stop listening until the murmurs became too loud? By 2016, the fractures are no longer just whispers. The streets are restless, the opposition is bolder, and for the first time in 2 decades, the idea that Yahya Jammeh could actually lose power no longer sounds impossible. The election of December 1st, 2016, is meant to be a formality. For over 2 decades, Yahya Jammeh has perfected the art of winning, through a mix of intimidation, manipulation, and the kind of control over the electoral machinery that leaves little to chance. His rallies are still loud and colorful. The state media still plays his speeches on repeat, and many Gambians assume the outcome is already decided before a single ballot is cast. But this time, something is different. The opposition, long fractured into small parties, has united behind a single candidate. Adama Barrow, a former real estate agent with a calm demeanor and a message focused on change rather than personal vendettas. Civil society groups quietly encourage voter registration. The diaspora, emboldened by social media, campaigns vigorously from abroad. Even in villages that once seemed firmly in Jammeh's grip, there are quiet nods and careful conversations about the need for something new. On election day, turnout is high. The process, watched closely by observers, proceeds without the kind of overt interference many feared. Ballots are cast using the country's unique marble voting system, a method Jammeh himself once defended as foolproof. As the marbles drop into the drums, the sound echoes like small bursts of defiance. The first signs of trouble come that night, as unofficial tallies begin to spread. opposition strongholds report overwhelming support for Barrow. In places where Jammeh once dominated, the margins are slimmer than expected. By the following day, whispers turn into confident statements. The incumbent is losing. When the Independent Electoral Commission announces the final results, it is official. Adama Barrow has won. The numbers are not close enough for dispute. In a moment that shocks even his critics, Jammeh appears on state television, smiling, congratulating his opponent, and pledging a smooth transfer of power. Gambians pour into the streets in celebration, some crying, others dancing. Many simply stunned that the man they thought immovable has conceded. For a brief, surreal week, it seems the transition will be peaceful. Barrow begins forming his team. Regional leaders praise Jammeh for respecting the will of the people. The international community breathes a sigh of relief. But then, the reversal. Citing abnormalities in the vote, Jammeh announces he is rejecting the results. The concession speech vanishes from state media archives. Soldiers are deployed to key points in the capital. Ministers loyal to him begin speaking of new elections, of foreign interference, of conspiracies to destabilize the Gambia. The atmosphere shifts overnight. The streets empty. The same people who danced in celebration now watch from behind closed curtains. The opposition flees or goes into hiding. Regional leaders scramble to respond, while the possibility of violence hangs in the air. Many people still think Jammeh's initial concession was genuine, a moment of acceptance undone by pressure from hardliners in his circle. But others believe it was always a tactic, a calculated move to gauge the reaction at home and abroad before deciding whether to dig in. So, what do you think? Did he truly waver? Or was the reversal always part of the script? By late December, the Gambia is in political limbo. A president who is lost refuses to leave. A president-elect waits in uncertainty. And the country, for the first time in decades, stands at the edge of a confrontation that could decide not just who leads, but what kind of nation it will be. January 2017 begins with an uneasy stillness in the Gambia. The election is over, the results are clear, but Yahya Jammeh remains ensconced in State House, surrounded by loyal soldiers and guarded by layers of command that answer only to him. His refusal to step down has thrown the country into a standoff, one that is now playing out as much in foreign capitals as in Banjul's streets. The Economic Community of West African States, ECOWAS, moves quickly, dispatching envoys to persuade him to accept the outcome. Presidents from neighboring Senegal, Nigeria, and Liberia arrive in quiet succession, holding closed-door meetings where they offer assurances, incentives, and eventually, ultimatums. Jammeh listens politely, sometimes smiling, sometimes stone-faced, but never committing to leave. In public, he frames his stance as a defense of democracy. He claims the vote was riddled with irregularities, that foreign powers meddled in the process, that only a fresh election can restore legitimacy. State media repeats these claims tirelessly, mixing them with images of his supporters waving flags and pledging loyalty. But the crowds are smaller than before, their enthusiasm less convincing. Meanwhile, Adama Barrow, the president-elect, is in Senegal under the protection of ECOWAS forces. His swearing-in is rescheduled to take place not in Banjul, but at the Gambian embassy in Dakar, a move that carries both symbolism and risk. For Jammeh, it is a clear sign that his opponents are preparing to govern without his consent. As the days pass, the pressure builds. ECOWAS announces that military intervention is on the table if Jammeh refuses to step aside. Senegalese troops gather at the border. Nigerian naval vessels appear offshore. The message is unmistakable. His options are narrowing. Inside State House, the mood shifts. Some members of his inner circle quietly begin making exit plans, sending families abroad, moving assets. Others remain defiant, urging him to stand firm, convinced that foreign troops will not risk an invasion. Jammeh himself appears torn, angry at the humiliation, yet aware of the risks. January 19th arrives, the end of his official term. Barrow takes the oath of office in Dakar, recognized internationally as the Gambia's legitimate president. Hours later, ECOWAS troops begin moving into Gambian territory. There are no major battles, just the steady advance of foreign forces toward the capital. For the first time in 22 years, Jammeh's personal security feels uncertain. Negotiations intensify, with Guinea's President Alpha Condé playing a key role in brokering a peaceful departure. The talks drag into the night, the terms shifting. Immunity for him and his family, safe passage out of the country, the ability to take certain assets. Many people still think Jammeh could have fought on, that his forces might have resisted a foreign intervention long enough to force new talks. But others believe he knew the game was over, that the loyalty of his army, while strong, would crumble in the face of overwhelming regional force. So what do you think? Was his retreat a reluctant surrender or a calculated escape before the walls truly closed in? On January 21st, Yahya Jammeh boards a plane at Banjul International Airport. He waves briefly, flanked by security, before disappearing into the cabin. The destination is Malabo, Equatorial Guinea, a country that does not extradite its guests. And just like that, after more than 2 decades, the Gambia's most polarizing ruler leaves not with a bang, but with the quiet thrum of jet engines fading into the distance. The air in Malabo is thick and warm, not unlike Banjul's, but Yahya Jammeh's new life is anything but familiar. In Equatorial Guinea, he is no longer the commander-in-chief, no longer the man whose word can summon soldiers or silence critics overnight. He is an exile, albeit one with wealth, influence, and a network of allies who owe him more than they would admit. The compound provided for him is expansive, guarded, and discreet. Here, he lives surrounded by family, a small staff, and the possessions he deemed essential enough to bring: luxury cars, rare horses, trunks of tailored clothing, and, if rumors are true, millions in cash and valuables. In public, he appears rarely, attending only the occasional diplomatic function or religious gathering. In private, he keeps a close eye on news from the Gambia, monitoring the shifts in politics as though the story is not over. From the safety of Malabo, Jammeh tries to exert influence. Loyalists still inside the Gambia maintain contact, feeding him updates, asking for advice, sometimes for orders. Statements are issued in his name, often denying wrongdoing or framing his years in power as a golden era. Supporters gather in certain neighborhoods and rural communities, holding rallies that praise him and question the legitimacy of the new government. Yet the reality is clear. He is no longer in control. Assets that could not be moved before his departure are seized. Investigations into his finances reveal staggering sums missing from state accounts. International bodies begin pressing for accountability, while human rights groups renew their calls for justice over the disappearances, torture, and corruption that marked his rule. For many Gambians, the years after his departure are a time of reckoning. Some celebrate his absence as the closing of a dark chapter. Others, particularly in places like Kanalai, speak of him with nostalgia, remembering the roads, the clinics, and the sense of power his presence brought to their village. His legacy becomes a battleground, half myth, half indictment. Many people still think Jammeh's exile is only temporary, that one day he might attempt a return, either through politics or by quietly rebuilding influence. But others believe the chapter is closed, that he is now a man out of time, his style of rule no longer sustainable in a Gambia learning to breathe without him. So what do you think? Is he a dormant threat or just a shadow on the wall? Years pass. The compound in Malabo remains guarded. The former president still wears the flowing white robes for which he was known, still carries the prayer beads, still projects the image of a man chosen by destiny. But the stage is smaller now, the audience quieter, and the power once woven into his every gesture reduced to memories and the echoes of a voice that once ruled an entire nation. So here, in the warm hush of exile, the long story of Yahya Jammeh settles into something softer, slower. The roar of crowds and the sharp echo of salutes have faded, replaced by the quieter sounds of ocean winds brushing against the walls of his distant compound. For a man who once held a country in the palm of his hand, the stillness must feel like another world entirely. In the Gambia, life moves on. Markets still open at first light, fishermen still mend their nets by the river, and children still run barefoot through the same dusty streets where Jammeh once played as a boy. The years of his rule remain, like the outline of a tide long withdrawn, shaping the shore even after the water is gone. For those who lived under him, the memories are complex. Some remember fear, the way conversations would fall silent when a stranger entered the room. Others recall moments of pride, when the president's motorcade swept through their town, and, for a fleeting second, the world seemed to notice their little corner of West Africa. History rarely offers the comfort of a simple verdict, and perhaps that's the truest thing about his legacy. It resists being neatly tied up. He was, by turns, a soldier, a ruler, a showman, and a shadow dealer in the darker currents of power. His Gambia was a place of spectacle and silence, of roads built and voices lost. Now, in the quiet spaces between the headlines, the country shapes its own story again. And as the night deepens and the wind carries the scent of the sea, the past lies where it always has, in the minds of those who lived it, fading slowly into memory.